Yeah, today we're going to update the status and discuss the implications of three major reviews into the not-for-profit sector, as Matt said. We'll be talking with Charities Minister Dr. Andrew Leigh, who should be available to take a few questions from the floor also, so it's fantastic to have the Minister joining us. He may need to leave soon after that for some parliamentary business, so if you drop your questions in the chat, we'll endeavour to get to as many of them as we can. And after that, we'll hear from sector leaders with their take on those reviews. And we've got a fantastic lineup of leaders from across the sector, including Opposition Charities spokesman Senator Dean Smith, Community Directors Chair Professor Susan Pascoe, Philanthropy Australia's Sam Rosevear, who's a not-for-profit sector veteran, Fundraising Strategist and Community Directors Council Member Catherine Brooks, ACOSS Community Service Program Director Rob Sturrock, NFP Sector Blueprint lead author Professor Jo Barraket, Good Things Foundation CEO Jess Wilson, Scope Disability Services Director Barbara Hingston, McAuley Community Services for Women CEO Jocelyn Bignold, and we've also got comments from Environment and Water Minister Tanya Plibersek on the impact of social media on the sector, which will be worth waiting for later in the show.
Gee, that's a packed agenda. We're going to have to keep tripping along here. But look, before we do that, I'd really like to issue a special welcome to all the ICDA members out there. I know there's a lot of you. Representatives of the Community Directors Council, some of whom appear on this episode, all those chairs, directors, managers, those peak bodies, the large and small not-for-profits, the service organisations, advocates, social enterprises, foundations, associations. A special hello to those government media unit people. Hello. Look, we see that we've got the RSPCA in, and they've had a good day today with their
live stream.
Yes,
yeah.
That's right. So we've got all kinds of people here. We've got lots of people from the legal sector, the of the community sector, academics, grants experts. I mean, there are so many. So it's great to have you all here, but look, let's kick on to the main event, which is the main major reviews into the sector, and there's a few here. So we've got the Productivity Commission report into philanthropy, aiming to double philanthropy. I mean, that's been lodged with the government. The minister, who we see is standing by, described it as a once-in-generation review. We'd love to see that soon. There's the not-for-profit sector development blueprint, which is
the Berg.
The Berg, yes. The Berg are the people who are guiding it, and it's a roadmap to guide government reform and sector-led initiatives. Now, that's due to drop in September. The DSS study into community sector funding, another big one. 237 submissions. We know that many of you probably have lodged something with those. So look, if you have lodged to those inquiries, just do drop into the chat what your expectations are. We're going to quiz you later about what the reforms we'd like to see.
Yeah,
all right.
To hear from you.
And without further ado, we'd like to intro the Minister. So over to you, Hibby.
Yeah, thanks. As Matt said, Charities Minister Andrew Leigh is standing by. We all know the Minister. He's a spokesman for the charity sector for 7 years leading up to the election before becoming Minister in 2022. So he's obviously got a lot of skin in the game in terms of advocating for the sector and trying to get reform through. He's been around for a long time. Passionate advocacy of the sector is evidenced by the relentless town hall meetings across the country to hear sector concerns firsthand. There's probably a few ministers that crisscross the country as much as Andrew Leigh the past couple of years. Some of the achievements the past couple of years signal an end to the war on charities, which is a whole other conversation, but with the appointment of Sue Woodward as ACNC Commissioner, revamped the ACNC Advisory Council headed by Sarah Davies, making inroads on DGR reform, which is a topic that doesn't take much to spark conversation on. It's close to everyone's hearts. Streamlining fundraising laws, lifting the veil of secrecy, preventing the ACNC to discuss investigations. And like myself, he's also a passionate marathon runner, but much better at it than me. So, FOMO from my perspective. But welcome, Minister. It is a pleasure to have you join us, and we always welcome the opportunity to chat. Just in a general sense, why do we need to have these multiple inquiries into the sector? And we'll get into each one in a sec, but there's a lot of spade work going on into the sector that we talk about.
Well, good day, Greg and Matt. Thank you very much for the generous introduction there, Greg. I feel like when you're middle-aged, anyone who's out there putting one foot after another as a runner is doing well. I'm joining you from Ngunnawal land today, and really want to thank you, the two of you, for bringing together this conversation, and all of those on the call for all you do to build a happier, healthier and more connected Australia. The reviews are about a couple of important parts of what we're doing in order to try and reconnect Australia. I'm not treating the charities portfolio as simply a narrow charities regulation role or some sort of outreach of social services delivery by the government, but instead as thinking about the sector as a vibrant, passionate, important one. This is, after all, a sector that's more than a tenth of employment, nearly a tenth of national income, and which mobilises millions of volunteers and huge amounts of private philanthropy in order to do good across the community. So the review we've asked the Productivity Commission to do is really about how we achieve our goal of doubling philanthropy by 2030. It's an ambitious target, but we believe it's necessary in order to get the resources out there that the charity sector needs. Half the dollars that charities have come from government, and we want to grow not only what government does, but also the non-government contribution. And then what we're doing through the blueprint, Greg, is, I guess, best thought of in terms of sector capability. Looking at issues such as leadership, staff burnout, cyber threats, some of those challenges and opportunities for the sector, and how we can enrich the sector, better connect up charities, and ensure that people have long and fulfilling careers, as well as maintaining the high standing of the charitable not-for-profit sector.
Yep. Go on.
Thanks, Minister. We'll take each of these ones in turn as they touched on them, but with the Productivity Commission report into philanthropy, what do you hope it will ultimately achieve? I mean, you laid out a broad strategic vision for it, but there was a lot in the draft report. What do you hope to see at the end? At the end of the day, yes, doubling philanthropy is the goal, but what are some of the concrete outcomes do you think you'd like to see from it?
Yeah, great question, Greg. I mean, one of the things that we're already moving on is charitable foundations, an idea that really kicked off in Canada, but now across Australia, you've got a host of charitable foundations and a bill providing a framework for deductible gift recipient status for charitable foundations has already passed the House. People who've read the interim Productivity Commission report will have seen the references to community foundations and understand the value that community foundations can bring to Australians. We're also looking at the deductible gift recipient categories. The system is not set up the way you'd set it up if you're starting from scratch today. We've seen iterative reforms adding additional categories. Some things are left out. Some things some people argue shouldn't be in there. And there's the challenge that it's difficult to work across multiple charitable purposes. So there was the interim Productivity Commission report had a lot to say about that. I imagine the final review will have a range of recommendations. We have been clear that we're not proceeding with their recommendation around school building funds, but more broadly that we're open to a whole range of reforms in this area.
How do you think the sector will respond to the report? Do you think it's...
I hope warmly and constructively, as they have with providing thoughts to the Productivity Commission review. Huge number of submissions, a lot of consultation took place. Those commissioners drawn from Productivity Commission ongoing staff, but also supplemented with the expertise of Christian Siebert, have really made this into a terrific report, which I'm looking forward to releasing soon.
You've read the final report. Would you like to give us a taste of what's in it? Like you alluded to a couple of things before, but do you want to give us chapter and verse? We've got plenty of time if you want to talk us through the final report that's not released yet.
Well, the final report will be out soon, and I think the best insights people can get from that is by looking at the draft report. That draft report's a very thoughtful document handed down at the end of last year. And I think one of the virtues, Greg, of the Productivity Commission approach is it does have that two-stage process that allows people to get an early insight into what the PC is thinking. It won't be long. We'll have it out for people to digest soon.
Now, Minister, I've got a question for you about the not-for-profit sector development blueprint. Obviously, you know, that's sector-driven, but how important is that for actually developing a long-term vision for the government?
It's really critical, Matt. This is about tackling a whole range of specific issues when I asked people about these in the latest round of charity sector town halls. As you said, we went to all state and territory capitals in 2022. Then we went back to many state and territory capitals again recently, and I surveyed attendees about what were the important issues for them. Issues around funding, around leadership, around burnout, and around cyber threats were certainly high on the attention list there. Better joining up charities. You know, one of my favourite moments in the charity sector town halls was a moment where someone stood up in the Perth town hall and said, "I'm running an Indigenous basketball charity, but I can't find any funding for it." And immediately another person at the back said, "Well, I coordinate local Rotary clubs, and I'm sure they'd love to help out. Let's have a chat." Those connections happen in my charity sector town halls, but that shouldn't be the only way of charities connecting with one another. So having more platforms for charities to collaborate is going to be super helpful. You see some of the big foundations saying that they're looking favourably upon funding applications from consortiums of charities. Again, way of getting more collaboration in the sector.
Look, many of the leaders we've spoken to for this edition are really concerned about the potential for lip service here. You know, they really want a real partnership. What can you say to those people? And we'll hear from some of them later.
Well, it's a completely different relationship between government and the charity sector than you saw under the 9 years of the coalition government. That period prompted 3 open letters to successive Liberal Prime Ministers asking for them to back off their attacks on the sector. These weren't fringe letters. These were letters signed by a who's who of Australian charities. That war on charities or attacks on charitable advocacy in the legal services area, in the environment area, in the anti-poverty area, in the overseas aid area. So we've made clear that we welcome issue advocacy by charities, not-for-profits, including when that issue advocacy disagrees with positions that the government has taken. It was really terrific to get together with the Stronger Charities Alliance, formerly Hands Off Our Charities, in Parliament House recently. They put together a bill on charitable advocacy, ensuring the right to advocate. And that's something we'll be seriously considering as we respond to the Productivity Commission's report.
Turning to the DSS Community Sector Funding Inquiry, what's the intent of that inquiry? I know your colleague Amanda Rishworth is heavily involved in that, but what do I hope to achieve?
Yeah, I mean, this is looking at the relationship between social services, charities and the government, trying to look at issues such as indexation, the longer-term funding agreements. I know one of the frustrations that sector had was that funding agreements weren't properly indexed and they were too short. If you've got at the extreme a 1-year funding cycle, then really you're funding organisations to spend money applying for the next year's grant round. And that's not in anyone's interest. So we've made very clear, and I know it's important to Amanda, that we see fair wages being paid in this sector. The government made a substantial commitment in our budget to the aged care pay rise, much of which will flow through to charities and not-for-profits. We understand that in many of the charity not-for-profit workers are working in feminised industries, and there's pay equity cases that have been brought there, which the government has enabled, and recognises that may well come with a budgetary challenge for us, and we're up for that.
You've outlined there's a hell of a lot of work going on at the moment in terms of sector reform. But do you detect a level of, after 2 years in government, do you detect a level of frustration in some quarters from some parts of the sector at the pace of that reform? I mean, we can't do, Rome wasn't built in a day, but is that something that you've encountered, do you think?
Look, Greg, I think that people appreciate that we have a Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission now that is firmly on the side of charities. In Sue Woodward, you've got somebody who's spent her life not critiquing charities, but looking to work constructively across the sector. In Sarah Davies, the chair of the ACNC board, you've got somebody who's not only a terrific chair, but also who understands many of the issues in the charity and not-for-profit sector. And that board, which was previously male-dominated and had no First Nations or called representatives, now is majority women, with called and First Nations representatives. In that sense, the ACNC Advisory Board looks more like the sector now.
Actually, I've got another question. It's kind of related to this overall issue about reform, and that's around fundraising. We know that there's a lot of changes that should and must be made, and you've agreed to address this. What's the hold-up?
States and territories have agreed to charitable fundraising harmonisation. We got that agreement shortly after coming to office. They've set their timetables. And we're following up with them at an officials level and ministerial level where necessary to make sure that states and territories deliver on this. We know that the cost of inconsistent charitable fundraising laws is potentially $1 million a month in additional compliance. So getting harmonised charitable fundraising laws that reflect the reality of online fundraising is important for the states and territories. They've signed up to it, and we're following closely to make sure it gets done.
Well, thank you, Minister, for addressing all of those questions. We've actually got a stack of questions coming in.
So we'll stop talking.
Yes. Now, I've got one here from Jeff Brooks. I mean, I'm wondering whether we're able to spotlight him, and he can ask the question himself. Is that possible?
Of course.
Let's try that.
Jeff?
And I should just flag that I'm due in the chamber at 1 o'clock, so I'll need to sign off at about 5 to 1.
We'll use every single minute.
Great.
Yeah. Minister.
Can people hear me? Or here we are.
Yes, we can.
Good day, Andrew. How are you?
G'day.
My question is one of the challenges not-for-profits have is funding for capacity building. Most of the funding we get from government, state, federal, and local is tied to specific projects with very little scope for us to, for example, build up capacity with staff or tech upgrades and so on to extend our work. Has the government put any thought to that sort of funding to enable capacity building?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really a question, Jeff, of what we're able to fund. Typically, government does look to achieve a direct outcome and encourages organisations to look for their base funding in philanthropic sources. That means that we're able then to say to our electors that the charity and not-for-profit is being funded to deliver a service, whether that's an advocacy service or an in-person service. So that's been the balance, and that's why I guess you see of the entire pie of funding, about half's coming from government, about half coming from philanthropy, and those philanthropic sources are typically used by organisations for base funding.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for that. We've got another great question here from Beth from the Australian Democracy Network. Is it possible for you to ask the question yourself?
It wasn't a question, it was just an expression of thanks for being part of the Stronger Charities Alliance launch last week. So thank you, Andrew.
Real pleasure, Beth. It was a great event, and terrific that you managed to pull so many people together from right across the charity sector. There's few things I'm more proud of than the fact that since we came to office, Hands Off Our Charities has become the Stronger Charities Alliance, and the training that the Australian Democracy Network does of charity not-for-profit leaders is super exciting and really important. There's lots of lobbyists working inside Parliament House. I'd love to see some of those pharma and financial sector lobbyists counterbalanced by a wave of ADN-trained charity sector people flooding the halls, talking about important issues for the charity and not-for-profit sector. So really looking forward to the next session of your training when it happens.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks.
We've got another great question here from Popo Chin from the Jacker Foundation. Are you able to ask your question directly?
Hi there. It's not really a question, it's probably more a comment around being glad that I know the ministers mentioned that the categories are being looked at. So really keen to know when that's available and whether or not we can review how we fit into this DGR status. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll have the Productivity Commission's final report out soon, but If you're impatient right now, I'd urge you to go to the Productivity Commission website and check out their draft report.
All right. Well,
that was fantastic.
yes. Look, finally, before you go, we'd really love to know what message you would give to the sector in the wake of these three inquiries. What do you think they should be taking away from your talk today?
I think people often imagine that there's a tension between a fairer society and a stronger economy. But actually, I'm having looked at the economic evidence, I'm firmly persuaded that high trust communities with high levels of civic engagement are also places where markets work better. But that's not the only good reason for boosting the strength of the charity sector. Places with strong community ties also tend to be healthier, both physically and mentally. And put most simply, we are happier when we're connected. Humans are ultimately a social species, and our charities are our very best way of connecting Australians, whether that's bringing together sporting teams, Clean Up Australia events, whether it's the social services charities coming together, or advocacy charities coming together to campaign on a good cause. There are very few things in life that are achieved by a single individual acting alone. Most great achievements are achieved by people working together. So a huge thank you from me and from the Albanese government to the extraordinary charity sector leaders, and really look forward to working with you to build a more connected Australia.
That was fantastic, Andrew. And again, thanks so much for taking the time. We generally realise it is busy. There's a lot of things, matters of state in Canberra and Parliament, and you need to head off. But it was amazing to have your insights and to talk through a little bit of those major inquiries that are going on in the sector.
We'll send some more questions to your people after this.
Look forward to it. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for that.
All right. Well, look, I know that there's a stack of more questions now flowing through, because obviously once you hear the minister speak, you're like, hang on a minute,
What about this?
Yes,
Yeah.
and I think some of the people that we're going to show clips for too later in this episode will raise some of those. So yeah, those questions that you throw in the chat, we'll keep an eye on those. We'll throw them at the minister and his assistants in the coming weeks. In the meantime, look, we did have a poll which was just basically asking what reforms people would most like to see. So Em, if you're able to throw that up.
Yeah, that should be up on the screens.
Yeah. Yep. So look, just throw your questions in there, your answers in there while we prepare for our next segment. And we've got
It's really good to see. That's
some
of the answers, some of the choices rolling in. Yeah, it's bullshit. Like
we realised that we'd thrown in quite a few questions there, but there's a lot of reforms that are needed, right?
Yeah, a lot of people on this call are used to multitasking, so that shouldn't be daunting for anyone, I think, who's doing that. But we'll come back to those later in the program.
Yep, keep answering those questions. In fact, I think they can stay there while we cross to our next guest.
That's right. We're fortunate to catch up with opposition charity spokesman Dean Smith to get his take on the multiple sector inquiries that we've just been talking about. He's Western Australian-based senator. He's been opposition's charity spokesman for the past 2 years. Let's be with him for a sec. He spent a great deal of time, like Mr. Leigh, traversing the country, listening to the concerns of charities, NFPs, and community groups. I think he's doing a lot of talking and a lot of listening. He's recently joined forces with the Community Council for Australia to try and find a solution to the impact that the government's workplace changes have had on fixed-term contracting in the sector, which we know is a very, very hot-button issue for a lot of organisations. And this week, you may have noticed, this introduced a private senator's bill aimed at using tax incentives to encourage tons of fresh food to be donated to those in need rather than dumped. So he's very much going from talking to the sector, hearing about concerns, and there's a couple of examples of solid advocacy being turned into change. So we'll just watch our interview that we've done with Senator Smith.
Do you want to talk about the results of the poll before the video?
No, I'm happy to let's let them run, because there's still people voting now. So let's show the clip, and then we'll come back to those results.
Thanks, Em.
No worries.
My concern at the moment is that there has been a lot of emphasis on process but not enough emphasis on outcome. So I am someone who believes that, as a general rule, productivity commission processes are valuable. You know, the process of a draft report, the process of being able to see submissions, the process of being able to comment on those draft recommendations, I think is a very, very sound process. But when I think about the Productivity Commission report, when I think about the blueprint, when I think about the DSS inquiry, we're going to get into a situation very, very quickly that we would have been talking around, I think, many, many similar and familiar issues, but people won't be able to point to anything that has actually changed. Now, it may well be that the sector is much more patient about these things than I have been given the impression that they are. But I just think that given the experiences that the sector had coming into the cost of living crisis, my great hesitation, having been patient and listening and giving the processes the benefit of the doubt, is that we could get to the end of this year and no tangible outcomes at all. No tangible outcomes at all. So I'll be disappointed about that, and disappointed for the sector, because I think that the sector is looking for statements of firm affirmation, support. I get that, but they're also looking for change. And if we can't use the pandemic to really catalyst ourselves into a brand new way of thinking, well, then what's the purpose of the pandemic experience? Ourselves having gone through the pandemic just to be where we were before the pandemic, that's not progress at all. That's absolutely a missed opportunity.
Yeah, well, we obviously hope that that's not the case, but we'll wait and see. There's a hell of a lot of work if there are no outcomes, but we'll soon find out the next few months anyway.
You look, we also spoke to Susan Pascoe, who's the former commissioner of the ACNC, the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission, and she's now chairing the Community Directors Council, which provides high-level advice to ICDA about how well it's meeting its mission. And this is what she thinks not-for-profits will want from some of these reviews. Em, if you can cross to that.
Look, I think the ability of the not-for-profit sector to have a stable financing is one of the really important things. And so, for example, from the Productivity Commission review and the recommendations around DGR, I think they're really very important. When you look at the capacity of many not-for-profits to have comparable information technology systems to those in either government or commercial sectors, some rectification there and some understanding of the need there is really important. Also, when you think that during the pandemic and post-pandemic, we've got not-for-profits that are absolute frontline, literally in many cases life-saving, but certainly community building and really ensuring the maintenance, health and stability of the Australian community. I think if those reviews recognise the role of the sector and then look to the sustainability of the sector, whether it's through absolute security of resourcing, whether it's through their IT capability, and whether it's through a recognition that they are a significant contribution to the health and well-being of Australian society. All of that, I think, will be really important.
Wow. So obviously during this cost of living crisis and many of the other challenges the nation faces, the government and others are going to be leaning heavily on this sector, and so they need all the help they deserve. Sure. Just as an aside, if you're having any trouble listening to some of our speakers, who some of them are a bit quietly spoken, obviously they have a big impact, but you can turn on the closed captioning as well. Anyway,
but hopefully you should be, yes, yeah. That should be good. Next, we also we're fortunate to have a chat with Sam Rosevear from Philanthropy Australia. Sam's Executive Director, Policy, Government Relations and Research at PA. He's a sector veteran who would undoubtedly be known to many people online here today, having worked at organisations as diverse as Teach for Australia, Beyond Blue and Headspace. We caught up with Sam to canvass his views and what recommendations he hopes the final Productivity Commission report in Philanthropy should contain.
National change. Yeah, look, I think this is a chance for transformational change in Australian society, with the goal of making us one of the most generous and giving nations on earth. We all want wonderful government services with universal healthcare and good public schools and a good welfare system. But on top of that, if we can have a fantastic and well-funded charity sector, it can really do so much to help millions of people, particularly those in need. The report went to government on the 10th of May, and the this is an election commitment, right? They've got to deliver on this or they'll be breaching an election commitment. So we think it should be publicly released as soon as possible so that we have media, so that stakeholders know what's in the report. So there's momentum for the government to go to Cabinet and respond with a big package of reforms. They said, we're going to double giving. They didn't say, you know, we might look at a few small things. They said, we really want to do something here. So stakeholders have very high expectations. And we did go to the Productivity Commission and engage them repeatedly. And they've been really open and positive and professional, and they're a great organisation. We did make the point, there's some great things in your initial report, but even by your own admission, it wouldn't do that much collectively. Even if you did all of the things in your report, it wouldn't do that much to double giving. So we want to see something much more visionary with lots more reforms. And, you know, we'd love to see a national giving campaign, for example, to do what we've done in skin cancer and heart disease and depression, where we've changed millions of people's lives and fundamentally shifted culture. We could do exactly the same thing with giving in our nation. So we've given them many, many ideas, and we'd like to see a much more transformational report, and we hope that that is where they'll go.
Some great insights there from Sam, and yes, Matt and I are equally as keen to see that report, as well as many of you would be as well.
Actually, next up, we've got Catherine Brooks, who's a lawyer, a funding strategist and CEO at Wendy Brooks and Partners, and she's also a member of the Community Directors Council. Her comments really relate to the status of those fundraising reforms, which we asked about the Minister about before, and we know that many advocates on this call, and we can tell from the polling that it's really a hot issue. So she addresses what some of the fundraising types out there will be looking for from the Productivity Commission review.
There are new national fundraising principles that have been enacted, and states have been asked to work out how are you going to align your existing state-based principles with the national principles so that we can have a bit of harmonisation across Australia. The states and territory have been given until the 1st of July 2023, so that time has already passed, to work out how are we going to harmonise our legislation in line with the national principles. Some states have started making inroads to this effect, with South Australia really leading the way, but many other states are still enacting changes, such as Tasmania, who had a bill that has lapsed, Victoria that have made some steps, but nothing has been put in place yet. So for charities, it's really a watch this space still and ensure compliance across the country, not just within the state that you're operating. We need to make sure that we're compliant with our fundraising laws and regulations, depending on where you're attracting the money in from, which could be nationwide, but really ensuring that you're across all of the fundraising laws that apply to your organisation up until the point that we do have consistent harmonisation, which we don't expect to really be in force until 2025 at the earliest.
Oh, actually, and there's another question she responds to there. You could just add that.
Well, there's certainly been some talk about reducing red tape when it comes to charities obtaining tax-deductible gift recipient status, which will be fantastic. It means that more people will be able to attract that, and when they give, they'll be able to get a tax deduction. So something like that is fantastic and will make it a lot easier for people to be able to give and for charities to be able to set up to attract funds back. We also need to really lift the profile of the importance of giving through your will. And I think we're about to see now the largest transfer of intergenerational wealth starting to happen 2023 and will continue to happen over the next 2 decades. We really need to support our charities to say we're open for business to attract a gift in will, and then assist our charities in setting up the gifts in wills programs. And then we need people to understand that when they're creating a will, to think about how can they give even just a 1% of their estate to a charity, and then that will certainly go a long way towards reaching the Productivity Commission goal of doubling philanthropy by 2030.
Wow, well, there's some more love there for some ambitious goals with that Productivity Commission review. I think there'll be a few nods out there in the audience for that one.
I've got their work cut out. Next, we had a chat to Rob Sturrock from ACOSS. There's a Program Director for Community Services at ACOSS. Rob's had some pretty strong views on what he'd like to see to come out of the DSS review in community sector funding. We're still waiting for a bit more detail on this one, but addressing the government funding gap for organisations struggling to meet rising demand for those impacted by the cost of living crisis is right at the top of the sector's agenda on this one and many other elements of that report. We note the DSS has dropped the consultation summary report, collating more than 230 sector responses to the DSS issues paper, A Stronger, More Diverse, Independent Community Sector. But there's no sign any of those recommendations will come back from the government. They are working on a framework to try to take this forward. Well, let's hear more from Rob on why he believes DSS and government need to move faster to address community service organisations' concerns.
It's probably the most challenging operating environment for the community sector in a generation, in 30 years. And if you think about the broader context that we had, the community sector is one of the ongoing first responders in the catastrophic bushfires in 2019, 2020. And barely had that last bushfire gone out, and when we rolled into the COVID years, with all those challenges, both economic, social, and health of that pertained, and then from there we rolled basically right into this prolonged cost of living crisis. So, for the sector, it's been under immense strain for now at least 5 years, and that strain comes on top of probably at least a decade of chronic underfunding of its services. So this inquiry came at a very critical point, because what we're also seeing is not only are those services under strain, the need in the community for various community services is up exponentially. You know, a lot of the services we talk to, like food relief, financial counselling, community legal, homelessness, etc., all the need in the community to access those services is beyond pre-pandemic levels. And you've got a sector that is sort of underfunded, that is absolutely beyond its capacity. It is trying its best to help as many people as it can, but is straining to do so. So wait lists are longer, people are getting referred between services and people are getting turned away. So we thought it was a critical point to be putting some issues very fairly and frankly to the government about the state of the sector. And then obviously one of the critical points was around improving the funding model for the sector. So really, we need to move to a funding model that fully funds the full costs of service delivery. So what we've seen for the last 10, 15 years is money going into the sharp end of program and service delivery, but not enough funding and resourcing for all the legitimate overheads that community sector organisations have, like any organisation. So a workforce, supervision, training, even the IT, the office overheads. A lot of that organisational cost is not built into Commonwealth grants. So we wanted to make that point that we know that might take a couple of steps, but we really need to have a better funding model that moves the sector to full funding so that it is more sustainable, more viable, and so we keep and retain workers as well. And there's been a lot of good faith engagement by the sector, I think, in 2 years, and it's really time to start seeing the results.
Well, tell us what you really think, Rob. It's no mucking around, knows exactly where we stand. So some pretty thoughtful insights there from him, I thought.
Talking about results, we've had a 91% participation rate with our poll.
That's amazing.
And I would say that given the number of people who've responded, that's statistically significant. I reckon there's a yarn in that.
I think there might be. In fact, there will be. But that is amazing. And thank you so much for engaging with all those questions. But they started tumbling in straight away.
Look at that, 68% there are saying sustainable long-term grants and funding, which fully fund services. And I think a lot of those things relate to each other, like the indexation issue, that's also related. I think, I think that's always going to be an issue for the not-for-profit sector, but it's good to hear that from the people out there.
And some of these relate to what Rob was just saying and others, that's right, that directly relate articulate to these concerns. So it's not surprising, is it?
No.
That high level.
Now, talking about what we're going to do about it, what the sector's going to do about it, we've been keeping a very close eye on developments, the DSS inquiry, but that also brings us neatly to what the sector's doing to drive change. Many people here would already know about the not-for-profit sector blueprint, which, as the name suggests, is a sector-driven plan to improve the lot of social organisations in the long term. So I actually spoke to the lead author of that blueprint, Professor Jo Barraket, and she can explain where things are at.
The not-for-profit sector development blueprint is intended to be a sector-led process leading to a 10-year plan to support the sustainability and advancement of the not-for-profit sector in Australia. So I'm one of 2 advisors to the Blueprint Expert Reference Group, otherwise known as the BERG, and I'm also the lead drafter, so I hold the pen. I have lots of editors, and I've produced so far the issues paper, also the synthesis of the submissions that have been made in response to the issues paper, and we're currently drafting the blueprint itself. So the issues paper for the blueprint process was put out for consultation at the very beginning of November 2023. There was a series of roundtables conducted at that time, as well as responses to the blueprint issues paper. We've heard from more than 12,000 organisations in that consultation process, as well as government departments, statutory bodies, the regulator, etc. And we're now at the point we drafted the blueprint, and there's some targeted consultation going on over the next 6 weeks or so with organisations that were less represented in the first round of consultation, and also with various parts of government and statutory bodies who would be essential to the implementation of the blueprint to ensure that we're actually creating actionable reform pathways in the recommendations that we're making. That process should be wrapped up in the next couple of months, and I won't speak for the Blueprint Expert Reference Group, but the expectation is that it will be delivered to government, as I understand it, by September. We've got the draft that is based on existing evidence and the submissions that have been made, and we're now testing some of the priorities that have come out. You'd be unsurprised to know that there's a long list of priority needs that the sector has identified, and one of the processes the BERG has had to undertake is prioritising those. So largely what's happening at the moment is testing those priorities and also ensuring that in the process of doing the work there hasn't been something essential missed in the understanding of what the priorities and the framework for the blueprint might be.
Actually, talking about that, I did speak to the professor, and I hadn't got time to include all of the things that she mentioned, but she did specifically say that they had folded in some additional material about both support for First Nations recognition, but she also talked about technology, which brings us neatly onto the next speaker.
You're just on mute, guys.
Oh, thanks.
Apologies for that. That's why we have to take ourselves off. So we've got Jess Wilson from the Good Things Foundation. As Jess explains in our next video, the Good Things Foundation is focused on digital inclusion, and it's the NFP sector's important role in helping people in the community achieve that goal by ensuring no one gets left behind by technology that informed their submission to the BERG. Let's hear more from Jess.
Good Things Foundation is focused on digital inclusion. You know, we're making sure that people in the community have the skills and confidence and the technology they need to participate in the world. And I suppose what we know is that the not-for-profit sector is a really key conduit to supporting people in the community to be digitally included. And what we didn't see in that kind of discussion paper was around the need for digital inclusion to be a key focus. And in particular, we know that for the not-for-profit sector, that they also need, digital capability building. It's not just about supporting the people on the ground. To be able to do that, we know we need to support people in the sector to feel confident to be able to use technology, and not just to use the technology and the systems that their organisation requires, but also to be able to help people in the community to build their digital confidence. So, so I think that's what we thought was really important, was that not only that digital inclusion and digital capability building is a key focus, but that there's also funding to support that. So all of our detail in our submission, there's quite a lot, it's quite a long one, is ultimately about that. I think any time that they bring people from across different parts of the sector together, that's a good thing, right? So it's a good thing to have people working on an agenda to support this to happen. What I guess I'm, I'm always a bit conscious of is that anything that they recommend then needs investment. So it's about whether government is willing to invest in the recommendations that are made through that reference group and through the book. There's no point in having a talk fest. There's no point in bringing people together, getting all of this information from across the sector, people spending all of their time saying, this is what we think is really important, and then not having a clear, investment alongside the blueprint.
All right. Well, I mean, as mentioned, the not-for-profit sector blueprint, they're taking that commentary on board. Yeah. Look, one common theme that's really emerging is that organisations want to not just be listened to, but to build that partnership, and that's why we raised that with the Minister. Jocelyn Bignold runs McAuley Community Services for Women in Melbourne, addressing housing and family violence issues, and they're on a very tight budget. So let's hear what she's got to say.
What I'd like to see from some of the reviews coming down the line are 5-year funding periods. We'd really like more relationships with government bodies so that we can start to plan together. I know that we do have consultations and roundtables, but it still becomes fairly exclusive. It's hard to do maybe sort of co-design more locally. What I think that we need is resources for better technology, better data collection, better even evaluation. We really can't even afford evaluations. We can't think about collective impact. We can't do that partnership work. All of these things that together make a real package that we can then work together. I'm thinking of an example because we're in the West and we've got 4 or 5 agencies. We all want the same thing. So, we've got to scramble for a tiny bit of trust funding, get a bit of a project up, work it out. We've got no capacity to do that at scale, which I actually think would work for all of us better. Yeah, one of the things that would work for us with government involvement in our operations is really the relationship. When we have a relationship with government bureaucrats or ministers, we're able to work together and say, well, what are you thinking about? What are we experiencing? Because we have experience, we see things, government want to know, and together we can work out what's required. What we're finding in government is that there's a culture of moving people around. There's a culture of every now and again getting rid of a heap of people. And so all of that momentum is lost, that relationship is lost, that corporate knowledge is lost. And we're really basically having to start from scratch every few years.
All right. Well, look, that's a theme that keeps coming up and up. And we also spoke to Barbara Hingston, who is the director of Australia's biggest disability service provider, Scope. And she echoed that call and explained exactly why. Let's listen to her.
I think I'd like to see an acknowledgement of the sector as an equal partner in governance of, some very significant social problems, issues, etc., because they are so much the front line of responses to things not being good, without necessarily all of the resources that need to be applied to, really carefully considered responses to some of those sorts of issues. I think in the areas in which I've worked, in family violence, sexual assault, disability, and also other sort of community health spaces, I'd like them to be seen less as a control agent and more of a cohesion, cohesion agent in bringing together that sort of partnership that I was talking about before, in order to serve the needs of people who are most affected by poverty, by difficulties around health and education, but and the social issues that ensue from those sort of areas of depletion, really, for people. But if you want to get things done, you've got to be able to work with a whole lot of different stakeholders who are involved in delivery of services and responses to wicked problems. Less bureaucracy and control and more listening and shared response.
There's definitely some common themes there. We know that the Minister is listening, and what he'll be hearing is a clamour for things to change when it comes to funding, indexation, contracting, decision-making, fundraising, governance, regulations, and a whole lot more. We, of course, will be watching closely as these reports are eventually released and reporting on the responses from the organisations that will be affected, which brings us to what people are reading in our respective newsletters.
Yeah, we've got a little thing that just explains the difference between our two main publications. There's Community Advocate.
Yes, which is a weekly wrap-up of news, like a lot of happening news in the not-for-profit sector, so it's keep things moving quite quickly, publishing online, and bring that out each Wednesday, which hopefully a lot of you are already signed up for. And then there's CDI,
Community Directors Intelligence. It comes out monthly. You can just use the QR code there to sign up if you're not already. We assume that you're already avid readers.
Everyone on this call would be, so thank you.
Now we've got just something, we're going to skip through this, but we've got some stuff about some of the popular yarns that are appearing.
Yeah, both Matt and I publish a lot of stories. Just plucked out a couple that resonated with me for the past couple of months. Fiona Luth, who runs Fiji Book Drive, a charity, did a piece for us, 10 things I didn't know when I started a charity. If you haven't already, have a read of it, have a look, because there'll be a lot of pain and payoff that resonates for people and that have ever been through that process. Some of the results from the Pro Bono Australia Salary Report were quite interesting, and it was probably one of the most read stories, and it just indicates how much remuneration and overhead means at the moment for people in the sector. But one that did particularly stick out for me was the Environment Minister Tanya Plibersek gave the Jane Kerner oration as part of our Communities and Control conference, and spoke on the perils of social media for young Australians. It's probably one of the most powerful orations Matt and I were in the room, and it was amazing. She cut really to the heart of an issue that resonates for a lot of Australians. And we've got a quick clip here of her oration to have a look.
I hope I've made people think a little bit about pushing back on social media and artificial intelligence when it comes to the malign influence they're having on our young people. Now, of course, there's a lot of great stuff about social media and AI, but we do know that increasingly violent and misogynistic content is being pushed, particularly to boys. And I do really think it is changing gender relations. I think a lot of the progress that has been made towards equality is being undermined by what kids are finding in the online world. You know, so much of the work that the not-for-profit sector does is around safety for women and children. Domestic violence, family violence, sexual violence, homelessness, so much of the work is driven by issues around safety for women and children. If those influences online are making that issue worse, I think that the not-for-profit sector has a right to say, we're worried. We're worried that this is just, off the leash. This is uncontrolled in our community, and that it's making our jobs harder. It's actually harder to achieve gender equality when there's undermining of the progress that we've made.
Now you can see, and I recommend that you do watch the full oration on the Communities in Control website. You just follow the QR code.
An opportunity to work constructively with the sector after 9 years in which the coalition.
Whoops. Yeah. Anyway, you just that QR code on the screen. You can see. We'll send that out with the emails as well. Also, look, while we've still got you, we realise that we're running tight here. I just want to mention that the Community Director's Intelligence, the latest editions covered advocacy, which is, we know, is a really issue that's close to the heart of readers here. The AGMs, so if you've got an AGM coming up, please do have a look at that one.
A lot of great stuff.
There's a slide, we've got another slide there that just tells you how to subscribe to both of our newsletters. Now, I should mention, this is an exclusive here, that in the next couple of weeks, we're dropping another edition, and I can reveal exclusively to this forum, we're releasing a big new study, and it's called the Community Compass. It was commissioned by our community and the Community Council for Australia. It's groundbreaking research examining the relationships Australians have with the community sector. It's written by Rebecca Huntley, a renowned researcher. She's interviewed more than 3,000 people about the values, beliefs and behaviours, which has generated an audience segmentation, which we think is going to be extremely valuable for this sector understanding the way forward. So there's so much going on, obviously, in the community sector. We don't even have time to talk about our socials, but look, one thing I would say is you should get onto the not-for-profit happy hour, because there's a lot of chatter going on there. And look, finally, we should just give you a chance to tell us what you think about this episode. Next time we'll try and jam some more things in. What do you think?
Yeah, I reckon we'll try and jam some more content in. We're not trying hard enough at the moment, so
you can also share your subscription, whatever, link to other people if they want to see, if you think it's worth watching, which we reckon it is. Anyway, look, thanks very much to the awesome Anne for the tech support.
As always, Anne.
It's on. This is going to be on replay. Anyway,
you'll be able to watch the recording. Yeah.
No time for anything else. Thank you, everyone, for coming, for tuning in, and we hope the rest of your week goes really well.
Thanks again.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good day.